Do you feel sometimes that you're really just overwhelmed and overworked, and you start the day and you think, I just can't get through all of this? It gets immensely stressful. I've been there, and I think I've found the answer. It's taken me a lot of years, but I'd like to share with you this week how I've tried to tackle that problem, some of the solutions I've tried, and I suppose ultimately where I've ended up in a much more comfortable position. So let me help you with overwhelm and overwork, coming right up. So I think it's a very common situation, particularly these days in corporate life. Absolutely, if you're a business owner, it's just there are not enough hours in the day. It's like, you know, those spinning plates. You've got 20 plates spinning at once and inevitably one drops off, and it's immensely stressful. And particularly as a business owner, you very often feel like everything's on your shoulders and you've got to deliver everything, you've got to get everything done. And it becomes a little bit like one of those sort of hamsters in a treadmill, one of those sort of little wheel things. And you're just going round and round and round and round and never getting anywhere. So that was me for a lot of years, I can tell you. So I thought in this video I might just kind of share how I got into that position. Maybe it'll sort of resonate with you. Some of the things that I tried, which were quite effective, and then probably a bit of a breakthrough about 12 years ago, which really helped me enormously. It doesn't matter whether you're working in a corporate, you know, a medium-sized business, running your own business. These tips, I'm sure, are going to help you. So let's kind of walk through a few things. Now, I recently wrote quite a long blog post on this, so I couldn't get all the notes next to the camera, so I've got a few notes here. My apologies in advance. I'm going to glance down and make sure that I don't miss stuff. But I just want to kind of step you through that journey of overwhelm and overwork and what I think some of the causes were, and kind of maybe help you through that to some of the solutions that I found really works. You know, I think part of it right at the start is the individual. I have to confess I'm a bit of a workaholic. I know lots of people like that who are. I found work-life balance to be extraordinarily difficult to do, to my detriment, I know. I've kind of adopted this approach where I blend my work life and my home life. I'm able to do that because I run my own business. A lot of people obviously can't do that because you're restricted to particular working hours and holiday times and things like that. It's a bit of a cop-out maybe on my behalf that maybe I'm fooling myself that I get this sort of work-life balance by blending the two. So, you know, when I go on business trips and so on, my wife comes with me, you know, we'll kind of do a few business meetings overseas, and she'll come along with me and we'll turn it into a bit of a holiday, that type of thing. But not everybody can do that. But I'm one of those individuals who will turn a 9-to-5 job into a 7-to-8 job, catching up at the weekends. Is that you? And I think it's a desire to just want to improve what's happening. Not a personal drive necessarily. As a business owner, you know, I very often find myself thinking, if we just did that a little bit better, if we could just do that, and you know, I take it upon myself to do, fatal, you know, absolutely stupid. But that's kind of the background. And I suppose the struggles for me, I'm going to give you the bit of a backstory here and then help you maybe overcome similar challenges. The struggle really started for me. My first career, if you like, was in the military, very structured, very organised, lots of support around you. Don't laugh, it was back in those days when I had an office job, we had a typing pool. And it was very different then when I left the military about 30 years ago now into commercial life, because all that sort of support fell away. And I didn't have that clear structure and goals and objectives and things, and it's kind of all up to me. So I really took on way too much. And there just weren't enough hours in the day to get things done. So at one point, I sort of reflected on this and thought, come on, Rob, you know, I had formal time management training in the military, you know, some really great training. Why don't I adopt some of that? And so I did, and it made a bit of a difference. So let me just share some of the things, and these might be sort of fairly obvious that you're already doing them, but the first thing I did was sort of cut out all the time-wasting stuff. And I think particularly when you're not too busy, you end up doing little minute things, little admin tasks, which really are not adding much value, and they start to take up your time. And then as you get more and more involved in your role and busier, you don't get rid of those tasks. And you end up, I mean, this is an interesting exercise. If you sit down for a moment and kind of make a little bit of a chart or something, and think of all the things that you do every day, every week, monthly, and the amount of time that you spend on them, and then categorize them into, which ones are really adding value to you and the organization, and which ones could someone else do, or which ones could you just not do, you might be surprised. I reckon you're going to find at least 20% of the stuff where you go, well, hang on, I shouldn't even be doing that. Or maybe there's 10% where actually don't even need to do that. And these things creep up on you a little bit, so that's always a good thing to do now and again. I've done that a few times over the years, just to kind of give myself a reality check on, am I spending my time on the right things? So prioritizing tasks was the first thing. As I got into business, and I was really starting to get overwhelmed and overworked, much more so than I had been in the military. I really had to have a way of trying to prioritize stuff. And I went to this great seminar, I remember, and it was about being very clear with your objectives and putting the objectives up on the wall. And I had three pictures on my wall where if I looked up from my desk, I would see these three pictures. And I think, it's a while ago, but I think one of them was, like a big wad of money, and it's kind of, where's the money in that? Which sounds really mercenary, but it's straight to the point. I'm working in a commercial organization. Is what I'm working on now going to add value commercially to the organization? Is it going to take us forward? Is it going to improve sales? Is it going to improve the bottom line? I think for a commercial organization, that's probably a really important one to have right up front. If what I'm working on is not adding value commercially, why am I doing it? Just question yourself. The next question then, I think, was probably a pot plant or something, and it said something like, will this help us grow? So it's not all about commercial outcomes, but what I'm working on now, will it help the business grow? Will it help my team grow? Will it help me personally grow, which will help the business and the team? You obviously want to have some time allocated to that, so the ratio of time is important. And then the third one was kind of, will this grow the brand? And this was very important, particularly as a business owner. So I'm not just trying to grow the business, grow sales, improve the marketing, but I want to grow the brand as well. I want brand recognition. I want people to know about us. So those three questions, let's say I have a to-do list of 8 things today. If they're not hitting one of those targets, will it help us commercially? Will it help us grow as a team, as a business? Will it help the brand grow? I've really got to wonder why I'm doing it. There's obviously some very important admin tasks taking place, but does it have to be me doing it? So whatever type of organization you're working in, maybe just challenge yourself now and again. Look at the things that you're doing and ask yourself, is this really adding value? Because, if you're working at a large corporate, you've got someone who's monitoring your performance and they're wondering what you're spending all day doing. Maybe you get managed very closely. I've had that, certainly. So what are some other tools and techniques that I found? One that I learned over the years is called the pomodoro technique, which anyone who understands Italian out there, tell me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but pomodoro I think is a tomato. Quite where the concept came from, I'm not sure, but if you imagine like a little egg timer which runs for 45 minutes and it's in the shape of a tomato. What I've found when I'm working on really sort of brain work, if you like, mentally taxing stuff, things that require a lot of concentration, you can't do it hour after hour after hour. And I actually learnt this technique without knowing it was a technique when I was studying in university for my master's degree. And back then at Cranfield University in the UK, it was like full-time classes all day and then about 4 or 5 hours of homework every night. So huge workload, and you had to be very strict and disciplined in getting through the coursework. And I would come home, my wife would be at home. Luckily I have my wife there helping me out. And I would go into the study and I would basically work for 45 minutes and then catch up with my wife over a coffee. 45 minutes work, catch up for a coffee. 45 minutes work, catch up for a coffee. What I was doing without knowing it was applying the Pomodoro technique. That's exactly what it is. Give yourself a burst, and I still do this to this day. 45 minutes, you can get a huge amount done if you're focused, and if you know at the end of 45 minutes, I'm going to get a break. It's like a little bit of a prize. So it could be a coffee. It could be, I'm lucky enough to be in my home studio today. I might walk around the block. I've got lovely trees out here, and maybe at the end of 45 minutes, I'll go for a walk around the block, and then I come back in for another 45 minutes. So that pomodoro technique is really effective. So there's all sorts of time management techniques out there. Maybe if you've had a good one that's been really good for you, comment down below. I go way back. I had the old Filofax stuff and all those time management things. They're great, and all online now, of course. So the next area I want to talk about is the delegation of tasks. And delegation is a real art. So I'm not here to teach you how to delegate, but if you research it, I'm probably not that great a delegator actually. I used to not delegate enough, and now I probably delegate too much, which I'm cool with. But the art of delegation is to be very clear in the outcome that you're looking for. It's very specific outcomes and targets, and a very specific time frame. What to do if the person being delegated the task isn't sure. So they know exactly what they've got to do, over what time frame, and when it's to be delivered. So delegation of tasks. I think people who are not good at delegating are, shooting themselves in the foot. Basically, that they're creating a lot of overwhelm and overwork for themselves. So I actually had this issue a week ago. There's a particular area of the business. I love marketing. Here's a trap. If there are particular tasks that you love doing, guess what? You're going to get drawn to it, and maybe you're not the appropriate one to be doing them. Maybe they should be delegated, and this was the case. So I was doing some online marketing stuff, which, me as the CEO should not be doing. But I've kind of been running this business for almost 30 years, and I enjoy doing it. And so I was doing some stuff there, and I thought, no, Rob, give it away. I've had odd people manage these particular tasks. It's about the online advertising and things like that. Right at the moment, I don't have anybody doing it. That's no problem. I enjoy doing it. And I thought, no, it's taken me a couple of hours on a weekend to do this. This is silly. I could be relaxing or doing something else. And so I made the choice to delegate it. Now, one of the challenges you have when you're delegating stuff, and it's the same old excuse, is that the person I'm delegating it to won't do it as well as I do. No, they might actually do it better. Here's a challenge. I can think of some things I've delegated where my team do it way better than I do, but it's a common excuse. I would argue with you that if you reckon you're really good at doing this particular task and you're worried about the quality, if the person you're delegating to can at least get 80% of the quality level, it's probably good enough. You're going to come back and comment now and say, yeah, in this particular field, it can't be, we're going to have zero mistakes. But you understand what I'm saying. If they're not doing it quite as well as you do with your 30 years of experience, does it really matter? Is it going to be effective? 80% effectiveness, in most cases, will be enough. And how do I delegate that? So, the reason I didn't delegate it was I thought it was too complicated. It was too hard to teach. And so I had to remind myself of how to help coach others in particularly complex tasks. And I did a video recording. It was a screen capture. So this is, and it was something simple like Google Adverts. This is how I set them up. These are all, it was the setting up of the ads, how I tweak the ads, how I check in and check the budgets and check the keywords. It seemed very hard to explain, but when I wrote it down and actually went through a screen capture recording, it wasn't that bad. And now they've got a 45-minute video which shows them exactly how to do it. And that sort of form of delegation I find works really well, particularly with remote staff, because you don't have to worry that they forgot the instructions or whatever. They can watch the video again anytime, check in. And so I finally delegated, stuff that takes me a couple of hours a week, allows me to do something which is much more value adding. So delegation, really, really important. Are you good at delegating? Do tell me down below. If you're not, have you found some things that help you? Staff training, I kind of touched it on there. You consistently want to be developing your team. Not only to start taking over things that you're doing, but to develop them in their roles and careers as well. And again, this is I'm not one of these ex-military people that talks about the military all the time, but it just sort of came to me there that in the military, it was very much a case of you were trained 2 levels up. So whatever level you were in the organisation, you were trained to do your boss's job and their boss's job. And to a degree, I think that's really good in business as well. There are people in the organisation, in my consulting company, that can do what I do. If I got run over by a bus tomorrow, it might be 2 or 3 different people who would step in and cover my job, if you like. So that's good business continuity, having people that can do what you do. But it's also good to stretch your team, give them new things to do. So constant training, I think, is really important. One of the things that I do is, a lot of training courses and seminars, and I might be chatting with somebody over a coffee, and I say, well, that's really interesting. Would you like to do some training in that? Might be online training, might be some live courses. It's going to help me in the long run. It's going to help them. It's going to build their confidence, help them to learn new things. So staff training is really good. So that's some of the time management stuff. I'd love to hear if you found your own techniques and things like that. Let me talk about the biggest breakthrough though for me, and I was late to the party on this, and that is having a personal assistant. Now you might be thinking, particularly if you're a business owner, you might be thinking, whoa, that's sounding expensive. Park that for a minute. Let me just talk to you about my experience of having a personal assistant, because the upside can be enormous. So that was probably my biggest breakthrough, and I think I'd never had a personal assistant before, and it was about 2012 that I first had a personal assistant. And we started off with some very sort of simple tasks, and I didn't know how to work with a personal assistant. And I talked to some of my colleagues, and one of my colleagues had worked in a big corporate many years ago, and he said, oh, this is kind of how I managed my personal assistant and what they did. And I actually hired someone as my personal assistant who'd never been a personal assistant before. So it was quite cool, actually, because we kind of worked out how we wanted to work together. And I think it's worked out really well. And so, I initially hired this person, and I thought, what am I going to get them to do? So I started off with the easy, repetitive tasks. I was traveling a lot then. I was commuting interstate every week. There was setting up travel and scheduling all my meetings and things like that. So that was the kind of easy stuff to set up. And again, remembering about the training. Some simple training was required. So, I live in Australia, I live in Sydney. I was going to Melbourne every week for meetings. And so I would explain to my PA, Jess, I'd say, look, I like to get down on an early flight. Be aware that, depending on traffic, it can take at least an hour to get from the airport into the CBD. So leave plenty of cushion before the first meeting. Leave 30 minutes between each meeting. We came up with some kind of rules about how these meetings were going to be set up. And then I left it to Jess, and I'd say, I need to see a client next Wednesday down in Melbourne. Who else could I go and see while I'm there to make good use of the time? And Jess would start organising it and setting up the meetings and the travel, and I just rocked up, and that was great. So it was taking off a lot of those sort of little admin tasks. So we started off with the simple stuff, and then we started to get into the more complicated things, helping me with some of the marketing. So back then, 2012, I was doing a lot of the marketing, so Jess started taking on some of the aspects of that. And then we started moving into more sort of customer-facing stuff. I write a lot of client proposals and things like that, so Jess would help me starting to put those together and creating a library of them and managing all of that. And so, that was really, really good. It became so good, and the relationship became so good, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this later, that a year after that, after hiring Jess as my PA, I started another business, and I made her the general manager. But I'll relate that story in a moment. Let's talk a little bit about that relationship with the personal assistant, because I had a little bit of trepidation about that and how it's all going to work. I didn't know how other manager-PA relationships worked, so we kind of set up what we thought it would be the best way. It was very collaborative. and it's been an absolute resounding success. I could not possibly do my job anymore without a PA. I wouldn't even contemplate it. You know, I'd almost go to the stage of saying, if I didn't have a PA, I'm not sure I'd want to do this job anymore, because it would be too hard, literally. So, you know, I'm now on my fourth PA, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But what happens is that, you know, and it's great. Was it a Richard Branson quote or a Steve Jobs quote who said something like, train your staff? It was something about staff retention, and it was, you know, train them so well that they can, you know, move on and develop their careers, you know, separately from you, kind of thing. I've always had that approach. If you can remember that quote, do add it down below. And all of my PAs have gone on to bigger and better things. So Jess, who was my very first PA, was with me, I think 6-7 years. But I kind of have this deal with my PAs that, you know, we're going to work together. We're going to have this great working relationship. I really want to help you develop your career. And at some point, you're going to want to move on, you know. And I've had that discussion with my current PA. You know, you're not going to be my PA forever. I understand that. You know, you've got aspirations, you've got career goals, and at some point you're going to move on. But can we have a deal? And that is, you have to give me enough notice so that you train your replacement. And we've done that every time. And I think I've had 4 since 2012. Sometimes they've been new people coming into the organisation. What works very often best is internal recruitment. So my current PA has actually, you're going to get upset if I get this wrong, aren't you? If you're watching this, I think has been with me 7 years. But the first couple of years was another role within the team, not a very visible role. And when my PA at the time left, my current PA said, I'll have a go at that, you know, and she's been outstanding, absolutely outstanding. And if you're watching the video, I'll say it again, absolutely outstanding. So yeah, always thinking of, you know, career development and helping them, you know, move on to bigger and better things, but they've got to train the replacement. So what's been the overall benefit of having a PA? Taking into account that I'm a bit of a workaholic anyway, I don't know if I've ever worked a 40-hour week. I won't say how many hours I work, but I'm one of these people where if I save time somehow, then I'll put that time into something else. That comes with being a business owner. But what's been the benefit? Probably I've saved about 20 hours a week. If I look back to 2012 and the things I was doing then, I've probably saved 20 hours. So have a go at that exercise. Remember where I said, jot down all the things that you do? And if you could delegate some of those, how many hours a week would you save? That's an interesting exercise. And you know, are you doing things, low value is not the right term, but you know, you've probably got expertise which is worth a lot to you and your organisation. And there are some tasks which could be done by someone else. You know, have a look at some of those tasks. How many hours could you save? I reckon I save 20 a week. But that's only one part of it. You've got the flip side. Because what also happened when I started working with a PA is now I can do stuff that I could never have imagined I would have time to do. And my PA does stuff that I never imagined we would have time to do. And so the whole thing kind of grows like Topsy a little bit, that now you have much more capacity and capability to do things. So there are things that I would not have even conceived of being able to have the time and the capacity and the capability of doing. I mean, since 2012, I've written 6 books. I've run 4 different businesses. I currently run 2. I've shrunk it 3, just shrunk it down a bit. You know, I'm able to manage much more complexity, and I'm able to do more with my businesses because I have my PA and some other team members who've joined as a result of that. So it's not just you saving time. And this is what I meant, you know, earlier on when I said, don't just think about the cost of a PA and how am I going to justify that. It's probably going to save you 20 hours a week, but it's also going to give you extra hours of capacity to get things done. It's an absolute no-brainer, absolute no-brainer. So we talked a little bit about the the PA and manager relationship. My PA is absolutely my right hand now. We talk frequently through the day, bouncing ideas around. All those little things that used to chew up my time. I think I've already requested 3 or 4 things this morning. It's only 12:30. Whereas in the past I would have been distracted for half an hour fixing something. It's like, can you manage to do that? Can you do that? Yep. I've already had the answer back, on 2 or 3 of them. I said, fine, that's great, do it. One was actually a better way of recording these videos. Is there a better system to do this? I could spend an hour researching that. My PA's already researched it and said, let's use this system. It will cost X per month. I said, fine, sign up. It's so good just having that right hand. And I suppose in my particular role, I'm very heavily involved in sales and marketing, and so my PA is such a rock in that regard, helping me, manage client relationships, client communications, proposals. I'll mention a couple of things actually about that as we move on. One thing I just want to touch on though is I've been talking about a personal assistant. What's the difference between a personal assistant and an executive assistant? So that's kind of, excuse me, I got an itchy nose. That's the kind of progression that I've gone through over the last few years. And I started off with a personal assistant. And for me, what that means is this is someone who's working solely for me, really helping me with my tasks. Helping me out on a day-to-day basis. It's generally, because of my role, a lot of the sales and marketing stuff. I then very quickly promoted that role into an executive assistant. What's an executive assistant? Have you seen that film, Suits? I meant to look up the name. Is it Harvey, one of the main characters? And he's got this wonderful executive assistant who sits outside his office and polices his time. That's what my EA is like. I'll remember the name shortly. So an executive assistant has a much broader range of responsibilities, in my view, a lot more external interaction and communication. Most of my clients know my EA. She's talking to them, setting up meetings, following up on stuff. More importantly, though, she's also managing my team. Yes, I now have a team. So having a personal assistant was so successful, I then promoted my personal assistant to executive assistant. And my executive assistant has assistants now, if you like. So she has a team of 4 people that she looks after. And it's all to do with marketing generally, because that's one of my key responsibilities in the organisation. So that's great. I don't have to manage those people. My EA does it. So that's the sort of key difference, I think. Another really interesting element of the relationship, Donna. In Suits, it just came to me. That wonderful EA, Donna. Go and watch Suits. That's what an EA should be like. I'm not sure people fear my EA as much as they do Donna. Some people might. So anyway, I digress. Another aspect I want to talk about is managing up and down. And this really comes down to building the right sort of relationship. When I first had a PA back in 2012, I didn't want a relationship where it was just me handing out tasks. Here's 10 things to do. Yes, they've been done, boss, and then here's another 10. A much more collaborative relationship, I think, is so much more valuable. And let me describe how that works. And I see it as managing down and managing up. I'm sure you've heard of that term. So there are some things that I will delegate to my EA on a one-off. It's quite often research stuff, like I mentioned. It might be my EA helps me a lot with client proposals, and we have a bit of a process now that we use. So I'm not going to go into that. It's a little bit confidential, but it's a very clear process in how we put our proposals together, and my EA assists me with that. I just need to say, this client needs this kind of proposal, and she'll go off and make a start on it, and then I do the sort of final touches, giving away a few secrets here. So there's those sort of delegation type tasks. There are other tasks where that's her responsibility and I don't really know when it's done or how it's done, or that's not my job, that's her job. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like that, like helping me manage my CRM, helping me manage the rest of my team. I don't know what goes on day to day. My EA manages all of that. And so it's what I'm saying is I don't manage everything minutely. I hardly manage at all. We share tasks. You know, you do this, I'll do that, and we get on with it. And we're very aware of, you know, what our goals are each day, week, month. You know, we work really very closely as a team, and I think of my EA as my business buddy, if you like. We're across totally, you know, what the goals are here and what we're trying to achieve. The interesting part for me, and a very valuable part of the relationship, is managing up. My EA manages me. Now, if you're not very good at time management and getting things done, and maybe you spin your wheels a little bit and miss deadlines, having an EA is fantastic. So the relationship I have with my EA, and always have had with my EAs, is that if I'm forgetting stuff, if I'm not keeping up with getting my responsibilities done, chase me. And in fact, everybody in my business kind of does that. It's a little bit like that culturally. I'll get stuff from the accounts department and sort of say, Rob, you need to sign off on this. And this is not annoying. It's the culture of our business, and it's how we work. But they know that if they haven't had a response by the end of the day, remind me, I'm probably busy. And either they'll tell my EA or they'll sort of reach out and say, this is quite urgent, could you sign it off? And, oh, sorry. My EA gets a little bit more in my face than that. And we have a bit of a laugh about it at times. If there are deadlines approaching, she'll say, you've got to have this done by Thursday. Do you need some help with that? It's like, pull your finger out, Rob, you've got work to do. And I don't know what kind of a manager you are, but I really find that helpful. I want somebody who's going to keep me on track too. And I don't mind that sort of bluntness. So again, that kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight, but as the relationship builds and the trust builds, you have that really good working relationship. Sorry this video is going on a bit, but you understand why I've got a few notes now. So the $64,000 question, quite literally, is where do you find a good PA or EA? I presume you're going to start off with a personal assistant. Where do you find them? And that's probably about the cost of one, US dollars probably. And it can be a bit of a challenge. So if you're going to hire a local PA, they're going to work in your office or in your locality, maybe, work from home in your locality or something like that. There's a lot of benefits with that. Obviously, it's language, they're going to understand the culture. If they're in the office, that's great. It makes building that relationship a lot easier. It's going to be a lot more costly than other options. And I'd suggest, if you're trying to convince the organisation that you're in that you need a PA, go through that sort of exercise of looking at all the tasks you do and sort of trying to attribute value to them. And what you're doing is putting together a little bit of a business case in that here's the cost of a PA, but this PA will free up whatever it might be, 20 hours a week of my time, which will enable me to do, particularly if you're in sales or marketing or something like that, you can do much more revenue generating activities. So that should pay for itself straight away. And you need to really be able to articulate that well. It was an absolute no-brainer for me. Somewhat easier, of course, because I was the business owner, but I kind of had to justify it myself. But way back in 2012, I'll be honest, I would have struggled a bit to hire a local PA. I'm not sure what the going rate would have been back then, but $70,000 or $80,000, it's a big chunk out of cash flow. It would have been at the time. And so, whilst the local PA has a lot of benefits, for me, the affordable option at the time was an offshore PA. So I'll talk about that a little bit and how does that work. So I initially hired a PA through an agency in the Philippines. So you imagine like a big call center. And if you, I would have a PA sitting in that call center allocated to me, working full time, and we worked remotely. At the time in 2012, that was probably a little bit unusual. Now everybody does it, of course, because since COVID, and work from home and all the rest of it, we're used to working online and being on Teams and Zoom and all that kind of stuff. So I've been doing that since 2012. It's second nature to me. And that sort of remote relationship, it's almost like having my EA in the next room. It helps that I visited the Philippines to meet with my team. They have visited me here in Australia, and so that's nice to sort of build the relationship a bit. But even without that, I think if you're used to working with remote people, work from home people, it's easy to kind of build those relationships. So why did I do that? It was a cost thing, I'll be honest up front. And an offshore PA was about 10% or 15% of the cost of a local PA. Now, one of the things that I've never actually been asked this, but it's a question I'm waiting for people to ask is, but if you have an offshore PA, wouldn't you be taking work away from locals? No, it's an easy one because I couldn't afford a local PA, and so it wasn't taking anybody's job. What it has done in the long term has enabled me to grow my business and do things more effectively, so that I can actually hire more local professional staff. So it's actually helped me create local jobs, which is a flip side of looking at it, if you like. My experience in that, though, wasn't all good because I went through one of these big agencies in the Philippines to hire a PA, and it wasn't a good environment. Little things started to trickle through, about how they were managed and how they were rewarded, and it was a bit dodgy, to be honest. I didn't want to continue working with that sort of organisation. So actually I set up my own. I think it was in 2012, 2013. So I set up my own back office. Based on that experience, I set up my own back office in the Philippines, and I think we started with 4 people. And you remember the story of Jess, my very first PA. Jess was my very first PA in that office, and I basically said, "You're my PA, you're going to run this business." And that business started with 4 people. Jess was the president of that business, so we set up a local company, Virtual Done Well, it's called. It's all in the name. And that business grew to about 50 staff. And Jess was the general manager and did that for a while, and then moved on to better things, which was really cool. So, why did it grow? Why do I need 50 back office staff? I don't. I have 12. But what happened was that a lot of business colleagues were interested in how I was getting all the support and I was getting so much done and how I was a lot less stressed. And I'd say, well, it's kind of my secret sauce. I've got this back office in the Philippines. And they'd say, how can we get into that? And I'd tell them the story about how I'd gone with these big agencies and hadn't worked out. And they said, but can't we have somebody in your office? It's kind of not why I set out to do this, but okay. And so we started hiring other support staff for business colleagues. And, it might be accounting staff or marketing staff or customer service staff or whatever, and we just kept adding them in. We've moved offices 3 times because we've just got bigger and bigger. And the fun thing, my own support staff work out of the Virtual Done Well office in the Philippines. We're in the southern Philippines in Davao City. Really great part of the Philippines. And it's grown now to have a lot more staff in there looking after other managers in other businesses, and it's been great. But because it kind of started out as my own back office, it was never a business venture as such. I've got a very successful management consulting company. It was just my back office. And so it's been structured in such a way that it's really a not-for-profit. It's more of a social enterprise. Any little bit of profit it makes, we plough back into the local community with charitable work. It's not something I want to make money from. And so it's kind of been my baby, my hobby to look after over the last few years. And it's a lot of fun, and I get to work with some great people. And it's home for my back office team as well as lots of other people. So that's kind of the whole story about how I've overcome, I guess, this overwhelm and overload, which I think is so common and you know, so much more prevalent these days. And how do you get more done with less time? And it's just such a challenge. So reflect on what we've gone through. You know, some of the tips. Jot down what you spend your time on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and really question if you need to do all of those things. Can you delegate some? Are some of them really just not value adding and you could just drop them off? You know, think about how you're delegating, how you're training your team. Have a think about getting a personal assistant. That is absolutely the game changer. You know, whether you do that locally or whatever, you know, do investigate it. It is such a lifesaver. And if you're of the frame of mind that you think, actually, I could handle working with a remote PA, and Rob's setup sounds pretty cool, reach out. You know, I'll put a link down below. We can have a chat. Tell me a little bit about your business and what you're doing or what your role is. It's interesting, you know, over the last few years, we started providing support staff for small business owners. It's quite a few corporates now, some quite large companies. You know, we provide customer service staff, account staff, a couple of PAs. So, you know, even larger businesses are seeing the benefit in hiring offshore support staff. For the same reasons. They can't really justify the expense hiring local staff, but they can overseas staff, and indirectly it's going to come back and benefit, you know, the local team. So yeah, if that's something that you think could be of value, I'll put a link down below. Reach out. You'll probably end up talking to me, and we'll bounce around, and I'll talk endlessly about the wonderful PA that I have. I'm not going to mention her name because somebody will come and poach her. EA, sorry. Yeah, if you think that could work, jump on the link and we'll have a chat. If you've got any questions though about particular things around you know, time management, how you're struggling, do reach out, comment down below. I'll answer all the questions myself. Pros and cons, things that you've learnt over the years. You know, it's all about sharing and helping each other. But thank you for watching. Sorry this was such a long video, but I thought it worth going through the sort of whole journey and sharing a few of the things that have helped me. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.